when you mentioned here what I was trying to do for counties, my mind does go back to 1990 when I introduced legislation which created unitary counties in Scotland and Wales. I couldn't get it through my party in England, just like Peter Walker couldn't do anything other than two-tier reform in the 1970s. But I did create the opportunity for unitary counties, and the Banham Commission was established in order to travel the country, hopefully, I thought, establishing unitary counties. Well, I think it's about 13 counties took the chance, and then this government then brought the process to a shuddering halt. I believe as strongly as I believed then that we should have unitary counties, just as I believe strongly that we should have directly elected chief executives in those counties. And my only point of interest that I think is worth telling you about is when I was doing No Stone Unturned, it was about England. But I thought that it was important that I actually went to Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland in order to discuss the implications of what I was about to say. And I had a very interesting conversation with COSLA, which, as you will all know, is the local authority organisation in Scotland. And I was particularly interested to know how the abolition of the districts had worked. And I was expecting to get roughed up something rotten. And so I thought, well, let them raise the subject. I won't talk about it, just see what happens. And anyway, the meeting went perfectly well. No one mentioned the districts or anything like that. And so I thought, well, I can't go back without having tried to find out what was going on. And so I said, how did the reorganization of districts issue get on? And a lot of vacant faces looked at me. And so I tried again. I said, you remember, we used to have two-tier local governments here in Scotland until 1990. Vacant faces. And then it dawned on me. This was 20 years later. And I was talking to 40-year-olds who actually would have been not in the political world, probably hardly in public life at the time when the districts went. Nobody has talked about bringing them back. They're not missed. And my frustration is that it was my party that actually stopped the process. Although I have to say to you, and again, it's not a personal thing because it wouldn't have affected many of you, I was arguing for unitary counties way back, and I could never get the counties to see the point. The districts felt passionately, because of course they were going to go, but the counties were as indifferent as you could imagine at that time. It took a long time for the counties to wake up to the opportunities of having a much more coherent economic combination of forces with all the potential that existed. Anyway, that issue will not go away. My own view that the pressures of the economic cuts, which I support, will actually force change and will be a significant dynamic towards unitary counties. I listened to the debate about the cuts. Well, there's £10 million a year per county waiting as a result of the economies to be achieved if the districts go. And in this day and age, I don't believe that the service arguments stand up to the locality arguments, which of course were very important when these structures were created, the day before mass communication, the days before mass transportation. So anyway, that is a piece of history that I merely report to you, that where they have gone, there is no pressure, of which I'm aware, anywhere to bring them back. And I hope that that will be part of the county's agenda as they look to a much more important role than they've had up to now, which is the pursuit of growth. Now, I have to talk about a bit of history to understand my views. And I must apologize in a sense that this is a very self-centered speech, because my report, No Stone Unturned, was unique in one extraordinary way. I don't think anyone has ever before been given an official from every government department and invited to produce a report about a subject like growth with no attempt by government to indicate what it should say or to censor it in any way. Nobody, no minister saw that report before it went to the printers. And so it was what I believed to be worth saying. It is true to say that I had form, because I'd been around in politics for quite a long time, and everything in that report could have been predicted by anyone who knew anything about what I'd been saying. But it was a remarkable privilege to be given that access to the Whitehall machine. And in my experience of that machine, it is a fantastic machine if you know how to manage it. So, a little bit of history. London dominates the way we run this country. I'm talking particularly about England now, but we could widen it if we wanted to. Let's talk about England. And the reason for that is deeply embedded in the history of this country. London didn't make England. It contributed, of course it did. But if you think of the time when we created that extraordinary phenomenon of the imperial might, it was a dozen more great cities, the names of which are an essential feature of our heritage. Newcastle, Liverpool, Manchester, Birmingham, Bristol, Plymouth, Leeds, with London. And the people who did it were buccaneers. Their interest was wealth, and they seized the first mover advantage of the Industrial Revolution and created the most extraordinary phenomenon of economic power and imperial power the world has ever seen. They were buccaneers. And the consequence of what they did led to social conditions which were wholly unacceptable. Democracy demanded change. I have no complaint about any of that. But if you think about what happened over 200 years, what changed dramatically was that the growth motivation of the people who made those cities was replaced by councillors and their officials whose job was not growth, it was the amelioration of social provision. You only have to think of the names of the Whitehall departments to realize a consequence of that transformation of power. Department of Education, Department of Health, Department of Transport, Department of Agriculture, Department of Housing, whatever it may be. And you realize then that not only did the place that drove the concepts to growth of the 18th and 19th century be changed, but it was replaced by a functional monopoly in London. Great departments interested in the provision of support on an equalized basis so that everybody was entitled to much the same for a function. I can only remember one meeting in my very long exposure to public life that discussed place, and that was after the riots of 1981 in Liverpool. They don't think about place. They think about their functional responsibilities and how you can provide those functions equally across the country. And all of you are the branch officers, and you do not function as place that much either. Because where the real power lies is with the functional executives within your organization. The Ministry of Transport, yes, you've got it, the County Surveyor. Department of Education, yes, Chief Education Officer. And so that is the structure that actually every day dominates the money flow, the career patterns, take the Home Office and the police and the fire service, for example. And if you add to that the specific grants, the circulars, whatever it may be, you'll realize what has happened over 200 years. A quite different sort of person doing a quite different sort of thing has replaced the engine that drove the economics of our country 200 years ago. So what I tried to do in No Stone Unturned was to find out how much money was actually being spent after the cuts. Take the cuts out of the debate, absolutely. What was left? And broadly speaking, it's about £60 billion over a 4 to 5 year period, which includes about 10 billion of European money. And that will be spent within this functional discipline, within your and the district authorities, after the cuts. But it will be tightly prescribed. So what I suggested to the government is that they took the 60 billion and instead of distributing it along the functional lines, they put it into a pot. And then they said to local people, you bid for it. You tell us what you would do if, working from your place, you designed the maximization of economic growth with whatever money you try to bid for and with whatever else you add to it from local resources, either your own resources, sale of land, or inward investment, or from private sector investment in the area. In other words, gearing. Now, none of that should surprise anybody because, of course, my experience of working from the center, trying to achieve place-based localism as an initiative, the Urban Development Corporations, the Urban Grant, City Challenge, the Regional Growth Fund, they all told me that if you actually put the bidding process in place, you could actually get, first of all, local initiatives. Secondly, you could get gearing. The extreme example of gearing was the London Development Corporation of 10 to 1, but Liverpool at the same time, in the worst of all circumstances, got £1.50 for one. City Challenge, dealing with derelict estates, not the most attractive background for economic growth, got something like £5 for every pound of public money. Regional Growth Fund, we are getting something in the order of £5 or £6 of private money in addition to the public money. So the concept is not unknown or untested. It works. Incentives, a pot, a place-based solution. And that's where we are. Of course, I didn't get the 60 billion. I got 20. And I could have sat back and sulked and said I was robbed. But actually, no one else got 20 ever before. So let's go for it as a stepping stone. My own view is that the localist agenda is on the move. And what will happen in the next election is that far from the rival parties to power saying, we don't like it, it's all wrong, they will be saying the exact opposite. They will be saying, we're playing at it, we must go further. And all the evidence I have so far is that that bidding process is going to drive localism. Now, that is good news. Of course, this is not uncontroversial. And in the last paragraph or so of my report, I said, just in order to make sure that this criticism was on the table, of course, Whitehall won't like it. and they don't like it. Well, that's an exaggeration. Not all of them like it. And guess who don't like it? The ones who don't like it are the ones whose budgets are being put in the single pot, because that is their money, their career, their departments, and they don't think you're up to it. And so every device known to man is being deployed in order to water it down, to make sure they keep control over it, whatever it may be, whereas there are people in government, I'm glad to say, who take a different view. And so there's a sort of civil war going on, and you all know this, but you know, it's not, no one says this, but actually we all know what is happening. And we've now got to the stage where the LEP bids are about to start emerging. Greg Clark has done an amazing job in developing the city deal process, which in my view is not very different in concept from City Challenge of the 90s, and is very much a stepping stone to the concept of the single pot bids. Now, the local enterprise partnerships, why did I choose them? Well, as Hilary said about Everest, because they're there. And one thing probably you and I can unite about absolutely, don't spend your time restructuring local government. It'll take you an age, it'll have huge controversy, and by the end of it, you won't have done all the things that you wanted to try and achieve on the way. So when I looked at what the government had done after they'd abolished the regional development agencies, it was quite apparent they had put in their place local enterprise partnerships. So go with it. There is, of course, a joke. There won't be many of you who were active in this field in the 1960s, but I was. And there was a guy called Redcliffe Maud. And Redcliffe Maud looked at the 1,400 local authorities that existed then and said, this is ridiculous. No other country of our sort has anything like this sort of structure. And he published a map of what effectively were local enterprise economies. Some of them were broadly aligned to the counties. Some of them were broadly aligned to the conurbations. But there were about 60 of them, or something of that. And if you take the Redcliffe Maud map and you put it alongside the map of the LEPs, guess what? Broadly, we've almost arrived at where Redcliffe Maud recommended in the 1960s. And my own guess is that there will be another wave of local government reform. And guess what? It will be broadly centered on the sort of structures and areas of the LEPs. Of course, there'll be politics in it, but the fact is that is where I think we're heading, and that is where every other economy of our sort has long since been. The States of America, the Länder of Germany, the Département of France, look at MITI and the way they work with the local areas. It's all out there as a precedent and as a parallel as to how advanced economies try to get that one simple idea that the people who live there, work there, teach there, think there, know better than the guys trying to do the whole thing from London. So that is the concept. That's where we are. And what could spoil it? Well, the thing that could spoil it stone dead is if the LEPs don't rise to the occasion. If the the bids they put in are boring, conformist, inadequate, Buggins' turn, everybody gets a share. And that's why the first thing that I recommended to the government was that they should not allow the local planning authorities of local government to lead the planning process. What I wanted was to make people think in world terms about the best. What is happening in all those advanced economies in the race for growth, in the race for excellence, in the race to raise standards and aspirations and to get ahead, not of the town next door to you, but of the best that the world has got on offer. And in this country, we have a very, very successful industry of consultants who do spend their life on a world stage, pioneering for other governments the best. And so the 250,000 a year for 2 years that I recommended was designed to get the local enterprise partnerships to look for the best in their aspirations. I cannot know whether they've done it because the bids have not yet come in. But one of the tests of success will be the imagination that is deployed in the preparation of those bids. The second test will be the degree to which the gearing has worked. If the local enterprise partnerships mirror the local authorities and they simply say, give me the money, well, then that won't get us anywhere. And they won't win any money either, because we'll see how the government does it, because I'm not a minister. But if it was my decision, we'd just go on as before. And only those who did rise to the occasion would actually break through this devolvement of money and decision-making to authorities that showed that they can do it. In other words, the ones that created a combined authority structure, a discernible management structure that can carry the responsibility for this scale of local devolution. There are authorities that certainly will do that, but if enough don't do it, it will be leapt upon by the spending departments of Whitehall, who will say, we told you so, look at it, hopeless, nothing. Don't let it happen. The next area is the organization of the private sector. Now, the private sector is a critical role in the whole thinking of this search for growth. I'm personally much in admiration of what the public sector does, and I believe there is enterprise to be deployed in both public and private sector, and I believe that the partnerships between the two can be extremely successful, and indeed every international precedent of which I'm aware supports that view. But the private sector is not well organized. Indeed, it is deeply divided. CBI, Chambers of Commerce, Federation of Small Businesses, Institute Directors, and Engineering Employers Federation. If you go to Humberside, an area I've had a little experience of, and you took all those organizations, you will find that there are 2,000 firms in membership of the whole lot. There are 40,000 firms on Humberside. So trying to get the warring tribes of the private sector into an organization which speaks for the private sector and can service the private sector is a very important part of the bidding process. When the Prime Minister went recently well, he's just come back from India, but he was there a few months ago with a significant team of industrialists, he found there was no British Chamber of Commerce. There were 100 Germans in Mumbai in the German Chamber of Commerce, night and day, working for German interests. No such equivalent from this country. Now, Lord Green, who is the Trade Minister, has started a very important process of building up British Chambers of Commerce all over the world. But in order to do that successfully and get the government's export targets, the constituency at home has to be so organized as well, because we need more exporters or more companies exporting to different countries. We need a machine that is the equivalent of what our competitors overseas publicly finance. Small Business Administration in America, public law status for chambers of commerce in France and Germany. Hong Kong, they do it through Hong Kong Shanghai Bank from the government. MITI, we all know about MITI. We're the only one who stands back and says, oh, no, it's the private sector, we can't possibly intervene, is the language that comes rapidly to mind. Well, I would intervene without any hesitation at all, because if you want to win in today's world, you have to be the best, and you need to be organized and powerful and resourceful, and you need to use the maximum devolution of government money for all the services they provide through quangos to build up a place-based machine, a single shop, one-stop shop for the private sector. Another very important qualification for how the bids from the LEPs are going to be judged. So, I only have one last thing, which I think in what is inevitably a very sketchy speech. The concept of competition. I know how strongly some people feel, but how do you expect us to compete? We have a relatively complicated area. We like getting so many pounds per kilometre or per mile of road, so many pounds for elderly people, so many this, so many that. That's the fair way to do it. Well, that's the way we do it, but that is not the way that I would encourage the government to do it, because I think we're trying to raise the game. And when I did City Challenge, we made an offer of 10 packages of £35 million to 30 authorities. They had to fight each other. And there was a lot of very harsh things said. But we stuck to our guns. 10 authorities won. There was a lot of complaint. But the second year, the transformation in the 20 that lost was amazing. And what the 20 did was to visit the 10 and find out how they had done it, what machine they'd set up, what additional gearing they'd achieved, what imagination they'd deployed. So competition has an amazing effect, and it's not what people comfortably ask for. I love monopoly. It's a lovely position to be in business, but it's disastrous for the customers. And exactly the same thought process, I believe, has its impact if you say to local authorities, it's not an entitlement, it's an opportunity. You show us how good you can be. Let's hypothesize there are 39 LEPs, and let's say 25 of them are going to put in good bids. These figures completely taken off the wall. Don't take any, because no one knows what's going to happen yet. But let's assume that of the 39, 25 put in good bids. It leaves you with 14. Let's assume that of the 14, 10 are indifferent, amateur, incompetent. You know, they deserve to lose. Fine, let them lose. 4 did their best, and their bids are very disappointing. And this brings me to the aspect of my report I didn't cover. I call it bending spending. There are places in this country which, for historical reasons, have fallen behind. And if you visit them, you can't really find the strengths upon which to build a SWOT analysis. It's not their fault. It's the way it's worked. It's the way central government has allowed it to work. Now, my critics will say, well, what are you going to do? You've got the 4 authorities who haven't got strengths upon which to build. I say, no, I agree with you. So let's look to see what the capital programs of central government, which I didn't cover in my report, the health service, the transport infrastructures, the education, higher education, the military, huge, vastly bigger sums of money than the 60 billion that goes through the local machine. If you've got an area which has not got in itself existing strengths, then the government should look in partnership with those LEPs as what could be done. Let me take the most simple example. The health service programs, regional hospitals. Regional hospitals are going to be quite a long way away from most of their customers because there are not going to be that many. They have a huge capital investment, enormously sophisticated, and you can therefore determine where they will be. And if you have got an economy which is not strong enough on its own, you could locate a regional hospital there or close to it. But you wouldn't just say, let there be a regional hospital. You would go to the pharmaceutical industry, in which this country is a very important player, and you'd say, look, we're looking at, got a regional hospital, we think the specialisms in this hospital will be A, B, and C, and we're prepared to make it a world-class hospital. What are you looking at in the pharmaceutical industry about the next 20 years or so, where you might think of locating? What would you be prepared to locate? And then you talk to the medical equipment industry, who, after all, have a massive interest in looking at what's happening with patients on the ground. And you say the same thing to them. And then you bring up the local university people, and you say, look, we've talked to the Glaxo, and we've had a word to the equipment people, and we're beginning to think in terms of a medical complex in this sort of area. And what are your research programs for the next 20 years looking like? And oh yeah, and then by that time, you'll find a couple of property boys have been on the phone saying, look, we hear you're thinking of doing this, that, and the other. Well, we are quite interested in starter units or medium-sized units for businesses. And if you do this medical complex, what you'll find is there'll be a huge number of ideas come out of it, looking to be exploited in the commercial world. We would be prepared to be around in building the starter units. I invent, out of the top of my head, something that could transform the bombed-out area we're talking about. And if you then start thinking like that across the public sector, you could very rapidly transform the areas which have no SWOT analysis on which to base their bid. And if you've got any doubts about that, think what's happened with higher education to urban city centres. The coming of a new generation of young people in the university explosion of the last 20 or 30 years has transformed the inner cities of our great urban areas. So it's not new, this idea. It's simply looking at what has happened and using it, thinking about it, planning with it for the public good and for the pursuit of growth. Thank you.